My mom told the whole family. He stole my retirement money to fund his business. My dad called me a thief. My brother demanded I pay it back, and my sister posted it like it was proven. Then the account history came out, and my mother was the first one to go silent. Hey guys, quick thing before we start. I noticed the channel has been a little slow lately, and honestly, your subscribe is the biggest thing that helps us keep going. It takes like 2 seconds, and it genuinely makes a huge difference on our end. Thank you so much to everyone who hits that button. Means more than you know. Alright, let's get into it. My sister posted it on a Thursday afternoon. No phone call first. No text asking if it was true. No, hey, is this real? Just a paragraph on her page, visible to 400 people, that started with, my own brother stole from our mother's retirement, and ended with, some people will take from anyone, even family. By Friday morning, it had 47 comments from people I'd never met calling me names based on a story nobody had checked. By Friday afternoon, I had the bank statements. By Saturday, my mother was the first person in the family who stopped talking. It started on a Sunday evening, 4 days before my sister's post. My father called me while I was making dinner. I picked up because he almost never calls, and when Glenn Hill calls you on a Sunday, something is either broken or someone is in the hospital. Your mother told me everything, he said. His voice had a specific tone I'd only heard a few times in my life. The tone he uses when he's already decided what happened and is calling to deliver the verdict, not to ask questions. You took money from her retirement account. You used it for that business of yours. And until you return every dollar, you are not welcome in this house. I put the spatula down on the counter. Dad, I didn't take anything. Don't insult me, Eli. Your mother showed me the balance. The account is empty. Your name is on it. You had access. I had access because she asked me to co-sign it 5 years ago. She wanted someone responsible on the account. And you used that access to rob her. Is that what responsible looks like? Did you check the bank records? I don't need to check the records. Your mother told me what happened. She told you a story. The records tell a different one. Check them. We're done talking until you make this right. Don't call this house. He hung up. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. In those 2 minutes, my father called me a thief, banned me from his house, refused to check a single piece of evidence, and hung up without once asking me to explain what actually happened. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and looking at the screen that said call ended, and thought about the 3 words I'd said that he'd ignored completely. Check the records. I told him exactly what to do. He didn't do it. The records were available to anyone in the family who cared enough to look. Nobody looked. And every day they didn't look was another day they spent believing a lie they could have disproven with one phone call to the bank. Monday morning, my brother Kyle called. Kyle is 3 years older than me and has never once in his life verified a piece of information before acting on it. He didn't ask a question. He opened with a demand. You need to pay Mom back. Every dollar. I'm not playing around, Eli. Kyle, I didn't take the money. That's not what Mom says. Did you ask me before you decided? I don't need to ask you. Mom wouldn't lie about something like this. He texted me an attorney's phone number 20 minutes later like I was supposed to call them and negotiate my own guilt. Kyle had never consulted a lawyer about anything in his life. He'd never even read a lease before signing one. The threat was theater, but the damage was real because now 2 family members had convicted me inside of 12 hours, and neither of them had spent 30 seconds checking whether the conviction was based on anything other than their mother's phone call. By Tuesday, 2 aunts had called. Both of them opened with some version of how could you do this to your own mother. Neither of them asked for my side. The consensus formed in 72 hours without a single person picking up the phone to say, Eli, is this true? I didn't defend myself to any of them. Not because I didn't have a defense. Because defending yourself against people who've already decided you're guilty is like arguing with a wall that's already been painted. The color is on. Your words just run off the surface. So I stopped answering calls. I let the phone ring on the kitchen counter while I made dinner and ate it standing up and went to bed at a reasonable hour. I went to work every morning and clocked in at 8 a.m. the way I always do and sat at my desk and did my job while my phone lit up with voicemails I didn't listen to from family members who had decided I was a criminal based on a phone call from a woman who owed them different versions of the same lie. I let the voicemails pile up. And while my family was building their case with phone calls and group texts and moral outrage, I was sitting in my apartment with 6 months of screenshots on my phone and a growing understanding that the person who'd framed me was the same person I'd been quietly protecting since September. Then came Thursday. My sister Brooke, the family's self-appointed moral authority, the person who has always positioned herself as the one who tells it like it is, published a paragraph on her social media page accusing me of stealing from our mother's retirement savings. She used emotional language, moral framing, and the kind of righteous certainty that only comes from someone who has never been wrong because they've never checked whether they were right. She ended it with a line that was clearly designed to make people share it. Some people will take from anyone, even family. I didn't see the post when it went up. I found out about it Friday morning when a coworker named Marcus sent me a screenshot with a text that said, "Hey, is this about you?" I stared at the screenshot for a long time. My full name wasn't in the post, but enough details were specific that anyone who knew our family could identify me in about 3 seconds. Brooke mentioned a brother. She mentioned a retirement account. She mentioned a business. She didn't use the word allegedly because people who don't check facts don't need qualifiers. I scrolled through the comments. 47 of them by the time I saw the post. People I'd never met agreeing with my sister, calling me selfish, greedy, disgusting. One of them said, "This is why you can't trust family with money." Another said, "He should be in jail." A woman whose profile picture was a sunset wrote 3 paragraphs about how she'd been stolen from by a family member and how people like this never change. She was comparing me to whoever stole from her based on a paragraph my sister wrote, without checking whether it was true. I tried to open Brooke's page to see the original post and respond to it. I couldn't. She had blocked me. Not after the comments started rolling in. Before. She had blocked my account before she published the paragraph, so I couldn't respond, couldn't comment, couldn't offer my side on the same page where 400 people were reading that I was a thief. I closed the app, opened my laptop, logged into the bank. 5 years ago, my mother asked me to co-sign her retirement account. She said she wanted someone responsible on it in case anything happened to her, someone who could access the money if she got sick or needed help managing it. I was 27. I set up the account with her at the branch on Whitfield Avenue, filled out the paperwork, added my name as a co-signer, and helped her set up the automatic deposits from her paycheck. I checked the balance about once a year after that, just to make sure the deposits were going through. 6 months before the accusation, on a Tuesday in September, I logged in to check the balance out of routine. The account should have had around $47,000 in it based on the deposit schedule. It had $38,200. There was a withdrawal I didn't recognize. $1,800 on September 3rd. I stared at it for a while. I almost called my mother. Almost asked her what it was. But confronting your mother about spending her own retirement money is a conversation nobody wants to have. So I told myself it was probably a medical bill or a car repair, and I closed the browser. 2 months later, I checked again. The balance was $29,400. More withdrawals. Same ATM, same pattern. I started taking screenshots. First of the month, every month, I logged in and captured the balance. I didn't say anything to anyone because I was giving her time to come clean, to tell me what was happening, to ask for help if she needed it. She didn't come clean. She didn't ask for help. 3 months before the accusation, she called me on a Saturday afternoon. Normal call. She asked how work was going, asked if I'd been eating well, asked about the weather in that way parents ask about weather when they're filling time before they get to the thing they actually want to say. Then, right before she hung up, almost as an afterthought, she said, "Have you been checking the account lately?" The question sat in my ear for a second before I answered it. It wasn't a strange question on its own. She'd asked me things about the account before, balance updates, deposit confirmations. But something about the way she said it this time was different. There was a tightness underneath the casual tone, like someone holding a door closed while pretending they're just leaning on it. "Yeah, I've checked it," I said. She paused. 2 full seconds of silence on a phone call that had been continuous chatter for 10 minutes. Then she changed the subject to my cousin's wedding, said something about the flowers being too expensive, and hung up a minute later with a quick "love you" that sounded more like a period at the end of a sentence than an actual statement. I didn't think much of it at the time. I told myself she was just being cautious. Now I understand what that 2-second pause was. I told her I'd been checking, but I didn't ask about the missing money. She hung up knowing her story would hold. Friday morning, the day after Brooke's post, I drove to the bank on Whitfield Avenue, the same branch where I'd set up the account 5 years ago with my mother sitting next to me signing papers. I walked in, took a number, and waited in one of those plastic chairs by the window until a woman named Pam called my number and waved me over to her desk. I told her I needed the complete transaction history for the retirement account, every withdrawal, every deposit, going back 18 months. She asked for my ID, confirmed my cosigner access, and pulled it up on her screen. The printer behind her desk started running. While the pages were printing, she tilted her head slightly the way people do when they notice something they weren't looking for. She was scanning the screen, not reading individual transactions, but looking at the shape of the data, the way someone who looks at numbers all day starts to see patterns the way other people see faces. These withdrawals, she said, they're all from the same ATM, same branch location. And they're all weekday mornings, between 9 and 10 a.m. I asked her which branch. The one on Cedar Road. Cedar Road is 4 blocks from my mother's house. It's 22 miles from my office. I clock in at 8 a.m. every weekday, and I've never left the building before 5 p.m. in 2 years of working there. I've never used the ATM on Cedar Road in my life. My mother walks past it on her way to the grocery store every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Pam handed me the printout. 11 pages. She didn't ask why I wanted them, and I didn't explain. She'd done her job. She'd handed me the truth in a stack of papers still warm from the printer. I walked out to my car and sat in the driver's seat with the pages on my lap. I didn't drive anywhere for about 10 minutes. I just sat there reading the numbers and feeling something shift inside my chest. Not surprise, because I'd known for 6 months that the money was moving. What shifted was the last piece of protection I'd been holding over my mother. The willingness to wait for her to be honest. That willingness died in the bank parking lot on a Friday morning while a line of customers walked past my car without knowing that the man sitting inside it had just received proof that his own mother had framed him. That same Friday afternoon, I got a notification that someone had commented on Brooke's post. I couldn't see the comment directly because Brooke had blocked me, but my cousin Derek sent me a screenshot of it within minutes. Derek had written, "Did anyone actually check the bank records before posting this?" The comment had 1 like and 0 replies. 47 people had felt qualified to call me a thief, a disgrace, a criminal. 1 person had asked whether anyone had looked at the evidence. And nobody replied to him because replying would have meant thinking about the question, and thinking about the question would have meant admitting they hadn't asked it themselves. Derek messaged me privately a few minutes later. "I don't know exactly what happened, but this doesn't sit right." "What do you mean?" I typed. "Your mom's been weird about money for a while. She borrowed $400 from my mom last year and never paid it back. My mom didn't push it because it's family. But I remember thinking it was strange because your mom always used to say she had everything handled." I read the message twice. Then I typed, "I'm handling it." "Okay, be careful." And for what it's worth, I asked Brooke to take it down. She left me on read. That was Derek. He asked the one question nobody else in the family bothered to ask, left the question sitting on Brooke's post like a crack in a window, and then he stepped back and let me work. He didn't push. He didn't investigate. He just did the thing everyone else could have done and didn't, which was to stop for 30 seconds and wonder whether the story they were repeating was actually true. Friday night. My kitchen table. The 11 pages from the bank spread out in front of me alongside 6 months of screenshots on my phone, lined up in order from September to February. I started matching the withdrawal dates against my work schedule, which I pulled from the company's payroll portal. Digital time clock records. Punched in, punched out, every day for the last 2 years. September 3rd, $1,800 withdrawn at 9:14 a.m. I clocked in at 7:58 a.m. that day and didn't leave the building until 5:22 p.m. October 11th, $2,400 withdrawn at 9:31 a.m. I was in a staff meeting that started at 9 o'clock and ran until 10:15. 3 coworkers can confirm. November 7th, December 2nd, January 9th, January 22nd, February 3rd. Every single withdrawal happened during hours when I was physically at work, 22 miles away from the ATM on Cedar Road, logged into a time clock system that would have flagged me if I'd left early. Then I opened my phone's call log and started cross-referencing the dates my family had called me with the story they'd been told. Glenn called me Sunday at 6:47 p.m., but Sharon had called Glenn at 2:15 p.m. that afternoon. I know because Glenn mentioned it during our call, said, "Your mother called me this afternoon," for hours before he called me. She called him first because he's the one who doesn't ask questions. He takes whatever his wife says and turns it into a verdict. Kyle called Monday at 8:02 a.m. Sharon had called him that morning. Kyle is the one who threatens. He doesn't investigate. He enforces. Brooke posted Thursday at 3:47 p.m. Sharon called Brooke Monday at 12:11 p.m. 3 days between the call and the post, which meant Brooke had 3 full days to call me, to check the records, to ask one question. She used those 3 days to write the paragraph and block my account. I sat at the kitchen table looking at the pages and the screenshots and the call log and the work schedule, and what I was looking at wasn't just proof that I didn't steal the money. It was the blueprint of a lie my mother had built on purpose. She chose who to call, in what order, for what purpose. She timed each call to build on the previous conviction so that by the time any of them thought to question it, 3 other people had already confirmed it. I'd given her 6 months. 6 months of screenshots I never showed anyone. 6 months of declining balances I never mentioned. She tested me with that phone call. She checked whether I was watching. I told her I was. And instead of stopping, she spent the next 3 months building a frame around the person who was trying to protect her, and the withdrawals themselves. I looked at the transaction details more closely. There were categories attached to some of them, the ones made with the debit card rather than ATM cash. Home goods from 3 different online retailers. A monthly subscription box that charged $189 every 4 weeks. Clothing orders from 2 department store websites, some of them multiple times per month. 14 months of small, steady, unremarkable purchases that added up to $47,000 in retirement savings gone. Not gambling, not an affair, not a crisis. Just spending she didn't want Glenn to know about. Spending she couldn't stop. Spending she covered up by emptying an account she thought nobody was watching. She was wrong about that. I'd been watching for 6 months. I just thought she'd stop on her own. I thought she'd come to me and say she needed help. Instead, she came for me. She used the access I gave her as a frame and the trust one earned as evidence and the family I loved as a weapon. I stacked the pages neatly, put them in a folder, and set the folder on the corner of the kitchen table. I went to bed. I slept fine. Saturday morning, I printed a second copy of the transaction history at the library down the street because my printer was out of ink and I wanted clean pages. I put both copies in a manila folder. Put the folder in my bag next to a bottle of water and my car keys. I drove to my parents' house without calling ahead. I didn't text Glenn. I didn't text Brooke. I didn't text Kyle. I didn't announce what I was bringing or why I was coming. Nobody in that family had called me before convicting me. I wasn't going to call them before clearing myself. The drive took 20 minutes. I spent most of it listening to the radio and not thinking about what I was going to say because what I was going to say was already printed on 11 pages in a folder in my bag. I didn't need a speech. I just needed the table. Sharon opened the door. She saw me and her expression went through 3 changes in about 2 seconds. Surprise, then something that looked like hope, like maybe I'd come to apologize and make the whole problem disappear, then something colder when she saw the manila folder in my hand. Her eyes dropped to the folder and stayed there. Eli, she said. Just my name. Testing the air. I didn't respond. I walked past her into the house. Glenn was in the living room reading the newspaper, or holding the newspaper, which is what Glenn does when he doesn't want to think about what he's actually thinking about. Brooke was in the kitchen. I could hear her phone buzzing on the counter. What's going on? Glenn said, putting the paper down. I need the table, I said. He looked at Sharon. Sharon looked at the floor. Brooke came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel and stopped when she saw me. I set the folder on the dining table, opened it, and slid the first page across toward Glenn. The paper made a sound against the wood that was louder than it should have been because the room was completely silent. These are every withdrawal from Mom's retirement account for the past 14 months. Dates, times, amounts, ATM locations. Every transaction on one printout. Glenn picked up the page and held it at arm's length the way he reads everything, squinting slightly because he refuses to admit he needs reading glasses. Sharon was still standing by the front door. She hadn't moved. She hadn't closed it either. Glenn read in silence for about 30 seconds. His finger traced down the column of dates, then stopped. He looked up at me. What am I looking at? Keep reading. He went back to the page. His finger moved to the ATM location column. Same entry. Same entry. Same entry. Cedar Road. Cedar Road. Cedar Road. He read it the way you read something when you're hoping the next line will be different from the last one, and it never is. Someone must have stolen my card, Sharon said from the doorway. Her voice was steady, but her hands were gripping the door frame like she was holding herself upright. The card was never reported stolen, I said without looking at her. No fraud claim was ever filed with the bank. I checked. I didn't know you had to file a claim. I'm not good with that kind of thing. You don't have to be good with it. You just have to pick up the phone. You didn't. Because the card wasn't stolen. She didn't respond to that. Her mouth opened slightly and then closed, the same way a door closes when someone realizes there's nothing on the other side of it. Every withdrawal was made at the ATM on Cedar Road. I continued. 4 blocks from this house. 22 miles from my office. I work from 8 to 5. Every one of these withdrawals happened between 9 and 10 a.m. on days I was clocked in at work. I have the payroll records if anyone wants to see them. Nobody asked to see them. The silence was its own answer. Brooke had come out of the kitchen. She was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, her phone in one hand, watching me the way you watch someone when you're not sure if you should be angry or afraid. I looked at Glenn. His face had changed since he'd started reading. The verdict he'd delivered on Sunday was starting to look different in the light of Tuesday's data. You called me Sunday at 6:47 and told me I was a thief. I paused. Let the timestamp settle. Mom called you at 2:15 that same afternoon. I said the next part slowly, not like a list, like I was reading a timeline because I was. She called Kyle Monday at 8:02 a.m. I looked up. She called Brooke Monday at 12:11 p.m. Pause. Eye contact with Glenn. She called you first, Dad, because you believe without checking. Another pause. Longer. She called Kyle second because he threatens. I looked at Brooke. She called Brooke third because Brooke posts. Glenn's hand stopped moving on the page. He was halfway through a line, and his fingers just froze in place. His eyes shifted from the paper to Sharon, still standing in the doorway gripping the frame, and the look on his face went through something I'd never seen on him before. It wasn't anger. It was recognition. The slow recognition of a man who just realized he wasn't part of a family crisis. He was part of a sequence. Eli, maybe we should talk about this privately, Glenn said. His voice had changed. The verdict tone from Sunday was gone. What replaced it was something smaller, something that sounded like a man looking for an exit in a room where all the doors had just locked. We could have talked about it privately last Sunday, I said. You chose to talk about it with a sentence and a dial tone. He didn't respond to that. Kyle wasn't in the room. Kyle, who had threatened me with a lawyer, who had demanded repayment of money I'd never touched, hadn't come to the house that day. He was somewhere else, living in the version of the story that was about to stop being true. I didn't ask where he was. He'd find out soon enough. The room was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then Glenn said something I didn't expect. He said it softly, almost to himself, like he was testing a memory against reality and the test was failing. She told me you transferred it to your business account. One transfer. She said you moved the whole thing. I looked at Brooke. What did she tell you? Brooke's arms tightened across her chest. She glanced at Sharon in the doorway and then back at me. She said you'd been slowly draining it for months, taking a little at a time so nobody would notice. I let the contradiction sit. I didn't explain it. I didn't point out that one version was a single bold transfer and the other was a slow, invisible drain, and that those two stories can't both be true, and that the fact that Sharon told 2 different versions to 2 different people meant she wasn't remembering something that happened. She was constructing something that hadn't. Glenn turned in his chair and looked at Sharon. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time in the conversation, maybe for the first time in months. You told me one transfer, he said. His voice was quiet, but the quiet wasn't calm. It was the quiet of something under pressure. You sat at this table last Sunday and told me he moved the whole thing in one transfer to his business account. You told her he'd been draining it for months. Which one was it, Sharon? Sharon didn't answer. Her grip on the door frame tightened until her knuckles went white, and she was looking at a spot on the floor between the dining table and the hallway, a spot where nobody was standing, but where every lie she'd told was now piled up in a stack she couldn't step over or explain away or cry her way through. Which one? Glenn said again, louder this time. Not yelling, just a man asking a question he already knew the answer to and needing to hear the silence that confirmed it. She didn't answer that one either. And the silence that followed was the kind that changes the temperature of a room, the kind where everyone present understands that something has just ended and nobody is sure yet what it is. Brooke was looking at Glenn. Glenn was looking at Sharon. And somewhere in the gap between their two versions of the same lie, built by the same woman for two different audiences, the story that had kept the whole family pointed at me for 6 days came apart completely. Not with a confession, not with an explanation, just with the absence of one, which was louder than anything Sharon had said all week. I turned to Brooke. She was still holding her phone in her right hand, the same phone she'd used to write a paragraph calling me a thief and publish it to 400 people without making one phone call to the person she was accusing. "You posted it on Thursday," I said. "Mom called you Monday. You had 3 days. Did you call me in those 3 days?" She didn't answer. Her eyes moved to the floor and stayed there. "Did you check the bank records?" "Nothing." Her fingers tightened around the phone. "Did you ask Mom for a single piece of proof before you published it?" Her jaw tightened. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying yet. She was doing the thing people do when they're trying to hold their face together while their brain catches up to what their body already knows. "Or did you just want it to be true?" She didn't answer that one either. But her face changed, and I could see the question land somewhere behind her eyes where the other questions hadn't reached. I closed the folder, picked it up, looked at the three of them one more time. Glenn sitting at the table with the transaction history in front of him and his hands flat on the surface. Brooke in the hallway with her phone and her silence. Sharon in the doorway, gripping the frame, her mouth closed so tightly that her lips had almost disappeared. "You all had my number. Not one of you called to ask. I walked out of the house. Nobody followed me. Nobody called my name. The front door stayed open behind me, which meant Sharon was still standing in the doorway, still gripping the frame, still not moving. I got in my car and sat there for maybe 30 seconds with my hands on the steering wheel, looking at the house I'd grown up in through the windshield. The same house where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I'd eaten dinner every night for 18 years, where my mother had asked me 5 years ago to help her set up an account because she needed someone responsible. I looked at it, and I didn't feel anger or sadness or victory. I felt the specific weight of a man who just put something down that he'd been carrying for someone who didn't deserve it. Then I started the engine and drove home with the windows cracked and the radio off. Sharon didn't speak for the rest of that day. Not to Glenn, not to Brooke, not on the phone to anyone. The woman who had spent 6 days calling every family member with a carefully tailored version of a lie she'd rehearsed before she told it didn't say a single word once the truth was on the table in front of her. Glenn sat across from her at the kitchen table that evening with the transaction history spread out, reading it the way a man reads something he doesn't want to understand but can't stop looking at. Line by line, withdrawal by withdrawal. Home goods, clothing, that subscription box. 14 months of purchases he never knew about, paid for with money they were both going to need in 5 years when the paychecks stopped and retirement started. The silence between them wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the silence of two people sitting in a room where something just broke and neither of them knows whether to clean it up or walk away from it. Glenn didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He just read the pages and occasionally looked up at the woman across the table who had emptied their retirement account and framed their son to hide it, and then looked back down at the numbers because the numbers were easier to face than her. Glenn called me 2 days later on a Monday evening. The call was short. He didn't start with small talk or build up or the careful diplomatic language he usually wraps around difficult subjects to make them easier to swallow. He started with the thing itself. "I called you a thief without looking at one piece of paper," he said. His voice was flat, not because he didn't feel it, but because he felt it too much and flatness was the only way to keep it from cracking open. I don't know how to come back from that. I listened. I let the sentence sit in the space between us. His failure named in his own voice, accurate and irreversible. I thought about all the things I could say. I could have told him it was okay. It wasn't. I could have told him I understood. I didn't fully understand how a father could call his son a thief on a Sunday evening without checking a single number, a single date, a single page of a bank statement that was available to anyone in the family who cared enough to look. I could have told him I forgave him. I hadn't decided yet. "I know," I said. The call ended about 30 seconds later. Nothing resolved. Nothing promised. Just a father who named what he did and a son who confirmed it. And then they both hung up and went back to their separate kitchens and their separate houses, carrying the weight of a conversation that said everything and fixed nothing. The spending trail sat with the family for weeks after that. Not because anyone talked about it openly, but because the math was simple and the conclusion was unavoidable. $47,000 in retirement savings, gone. Not stolen by a son, spent by a wife. In small amounts, repeated hundreds of times over 14 months, on things that weren't emergencies and weren't necessities and weren't anything Sharon wanted Glenn to know about. A subscription box that arrived at the house every 4 weeks in a plain brown package that she told Glenn was vitamins. Clothing from department store websites that she paid for with the ATM cash so the receipts wouldn't show up on the joint credit card. Home goods from 3 online retailers whose shipping labels she peeled off the boxes before Glenn got home from work. She'd spent it on shipping confirmations and auto renewals and the quiet habit of buying things she didn't need with money she'd promised herself she'd stop touching next month. 14 months of next months until the account hit zero and the truth had nowhere left to hide. And when that moment came, she didn't confess. She built a frame around her most trustworthy son and set the whole family on fire to keep it covered. It's the first of the month, a Tuesday. I pick up my phone at 9 a.m. the way I have every first of every month for the past 5 years. The same routine I started the month after I helped my mother set up the retirement account at the branch on Whitfield Avenue. I open the bank app. The screen loads and shows my accounts. The checking, the savings, the investment account I started last year. The retirement account isn't on the list anymore. My name was removed 2 weeks ago. I filled out the form online, submitted it, and got the confirmation email while I was eating lunch at my desk on a Wednesday. The process took about 4 minutes. 5 years of access, removed in 4 minutes, and a confirmation email. The screen shows my accounts only. The account that started all of this, the one I helped set up, the one I watched decline for 6 months without saying a word because I thought my mother would come to me and tell the truth. The one she emptied and then blamed me for emptying doesn't appear on my screen anymore. It's just a missing line on a phone display. A small, empty space where a number used to be. I look at it for a second. The space where the account was. Then I put the phone down on the kitchen table, the same table where I assembled the evidence, the same table where I ate breakfast this morning, and I start my day.